Hashtag Trending would like to thank Meter for their support in bringing you this podcast. Meter delivers a complete networking stack, wired, wireless, and cellular in one integrated solution that's built for performance and scale. You can find them at meter.com/HTT. Our hosting provider went down today for a full day, so a lot of you may not have received yesterday's podcast or found the stories at technewsday.com. When we do get an interruption, it affects mostly smart speakers, which is a large part of our audience. But the show is always available on Apple, Spotify, or YouTube because we post it there directly. Be that as it may, the story on Open Claw, or whatever it's called today, was important, so today's stories are very short. And at the end, especially given what happened on the markets today, the story on Open Claw might be even more worth listening to. AI panic wipes out $300 billion in software stocks. The top OpenAI models are now Chinese, and they're not second-rate. Is OpenAI and Nvidia's exclusive relationship starting to crack? And Intel's GPU push gets serious. Welcome to Hashtag Trending. I'm your host, Jim Love. Let's get into it. Markets have been in full panic mode, and AI is at the center of it. The Wall Street Journal reports that fears over new AI tools wiped roughly $300 billion off software and data stocks in a single session, as investors rushed to dump anything that looked exposed. The trigger wasn't just one announcement, it was probably two. First, there was OpenClaw, which showed how linking AI agents together can dramatically amplify what frontier models can do. Second, the folks from Anthropic launched a new legal software that automates work that underpins entire software categories. Together, this sparked a broad sell-off. Salesforce, Thomson Reuters, PayPal, and many other software stocks and groups of software stocks all took sharp hits as investors asked the question, if AI can do this now, what is going to be the effect on software and software businesses? But here's a reality check. What we call AI today is still not an architecture that can run a corporate infrastructure on its own. It's powerful, but it's incomplete and inherently insecure. Will it get there? Yes. But when it does, that impact will be real and uneven, which is exactly why strategy matters. I still advise a small amount of companies on AI, and the guidance hasn't changed. You need your own AI strategy that's tuned to your business. Panic will not create strategic advantage. Planning will. AI will reshape the software business. There's no question about that. But don't confuse the panic of an overvalued market with corporate reality. What we're seeing here may be how every bubble ends or how market corrections happen. But don't confuse ill-advised investment panic with corporate reality. I'll have more to say about this on the weekend show. According to Forbes, the top 3 open-weight AI models are now all from Chinese research groups. And these aren't knockoffs or watered-down systems. On multiple public benchmarks, they're fully competitive with U.S. foundation models, and in some cases, they actually outperform them. Alibaba's Qwen models, for instance, have recently matched or beaten some U.S. models on reasoning and coding tests. So the big commercial models are all U.S. The top open models are all Chinese. And in the open source world, Meta remains the largest U.S. player with Llama, but is it really open source? Its licensing limits mean it's not really fully open. So, does this matter? Well, one company thinks it does. RCAI says it's trying to reverse the trend, but it's still fundraising, reportedly at a valuation above $1 billion. So there are contenders, But will private U.S. capital step up to compete with China's open models? Reports from Yahoo Finance suggest OpenAI is increasingly frustrated with Nvidia, particularly around the pace and availability of advanced AI chips. OpenAI is now quietly exploring alternatives, including custom silicon and other hardware partners. That comes as Nvidia has been hedging as well. Its much publicized commitment of up to $100 billion tied to OpenAI's purchases of Nvidia chips raised questions from the start about circular dependence, a chip supplier backing its biggest customer, while that customer depends almost entirely on its chips. So which came first? OpenAI looking elsewhere, or Nvidia hedging its bets? We don't know. But as in life, when both sides stop being exclusive, it's usually a sign that the relationship is undergoing a change. And finally, Intel says it's serious about building its own GPUs, and CEO Lip-Bu Tan brought receipts. Speaking this week, Tan said, "I just hired the chief GPU architect, and he's very good. I'm delighted he joined me," adding that it took some persuading to get him on board. And that hire matters. Reports say the architect is Eric Demers, a key executive who left Qualcomm last month to join Intel. At the same time, Tan says Intel plans to use its own foundries to build these chips, not just design them. And Tan has been blunt. Chinese chip makers are catching up fast. So even in its diminished state, Intel and the U.S. can't afford to lose the GPU and AI race this late in the game. That's our top stories for today, and now our repeat of yesterday's episode. I hope you enjoy it. OpenClaw scores 2 out of 100 in security testing. OpenAI quietly sets a $200,000 floor for ChatGPT ads. SpaceX restricts Russian Starlink use after Ukraine warning. And Nvidia shares slip as OpenAI's mega deal questions resurface. Welcome to Hashtag Trending. I'm your host, Jim Love. Let's get into it. I got a note yesterday from a listener who said they were looking forward to more information on OpenClaw, formerly Moltbot, formerly Claudebot. One reason we waited is that we wanted to have something measurable, not just noise. And now we have it. In an independent security analysis last week, OpenClaw scored 2 out of 100. And that score came from automated testing that showed extremely high success rates for both data extraction and injection attacks. In practical terms, the system failed almost every basic security test that was thrown at it. In a separate test, an autonomous AI-driven penetration tool was able to compromise a fresh OpenClaw installation in about 100 minutes, achieving a one-click account takeover that led directly to remote code execution with no human involvement. I did do a rundown of OpenClaw and what it was and why it was in the news on our Friday show, and we spent about half of our Saturday show talking about OpenClaw, including some in-depth things that we were looking at. But I held off on Monday, at least for Hashtag Trending. We did cover it on Cybersecurity Today, our security podcast, where we walked through some of the technical details behind a major vulnerability that had happened. But beyond that, I just didn't feel there was enough solid, reliable information to justify jumping back in right away. Now, there was no shortage of stories. Some of them were actually fairly fanciful is the best way to explain them, including some claims about a social media network built for and by OpenClaw agents. The problem wasn't a lack of commentary or stories. It was a lack of dependable analysis. Everyone was scrambling to jump on the bandwagon, and that's when things get dangerous if your job is to inform an audience. We're not perfect, but we do try to make sure that we've applied at least critical thinking and experience before we pass anything along to you. So we waited. Here's what we can now say with confidence. OpenClaw is a clever way of linking together AI agents so they can execute actions and call tools and even maintain various states. But many of the claims about what it can do are simply exaggerated. Our own co-host, Marcel Gagné, a very experienced Linux administrator, installed it. He didn't find it meaningfully more capable than most of the existing tools he was using, but he then promptly removed it. And the reason he removed it matters, because one thing about OpenClaw that is not overhyped at all, it is a serious security risk. I don't mean to lecture anybody, but this is not something you should be running on a work computer. Frankly, I wouldn't put it on my home system either. I've actually started mounting a separate system just to try and run it in the future. And that's not just my opinion. One of the project's maintainers said plainly that the software is dangerous for non-technical users. And if you don't understand thoroughly how to operate it at the command line, you shouldn't be using it. So, for those who want to know what's actually wrong in plain language, and I'm sure others will have opinions, but this is the best that I can come up with. At its core, OpenClaw acts as a command hub. It connects AI agents to tools, APIs, memory files, wait for that, and sometimes to your local system. To do that, it opens a live network gateway so the agent can communicate in real time. By the way, while it's doing that, to have any real effect, you're giving it a lot of power over your own system, the data, and even the software. So, with that in mind, this gateway is the first major problem. By default, OpenClaw allows key connection settings to be overridden using simple URL parameters. I'm oversimplifying, but that's how you do it. In practical terms, what it means is an attacker can redirect the software to connect to, say, a server they control. And when that happens, OpenClaw happily will send along its authentication token, essentially the keys to the system. Now, once an attacker has that token, they're no longer guessing, they're logged in. From there, researchers have demonstrated a one-click account takeover that led directly to remote code execution. In normal language, that means an attacker can run commands on the system OpenClaw is installed on. They can read files, steal API keys, modify configurations, or use the machine as a launch point for further attacks. It gets worse. Independent testing that's been done over the past few days showed that OpenClaw is highly vulnerable to what's called prompt injection. And I'm sure most of you know that's a way of getting around the safeguards or the guardrails in your AI system and making it do something it shouldn't. No, this isn't about making AI say something odd. Testers were able to extract the full system prompt almost immediately, and that exposed the internal instructions, the tool wiring, the configuration details, and even memory files. Now, back to the memory files. Some users have described OpenClaw as learning. I dispute that, and I stand to be corrected. Anybody out there wants to give me a technical correction, I'm happy. But what's happening is most likely more mundane and more dangerous. The system writes conversational state and operational data to disk. That means that information is stored locally in a way that makes it accessible to anyone who gains access to the system. See my earlier comments on how easily you can get access to the system. In other words, if somebody compromises the machine, they don't just see what the agent is doing now. They can see what it's done before and a lot of information that you've stored. Now, combined with the fact that thousands of OpenClaw instances were deployed using a one-click installer and left exposed to the internet, this risk compounds quickly. Scans over the weekend found API keys for major AI services, VPN credentials, and full conversation histories sitting out in the open. And that's why the maintainers are being unusually blunt. To behave in even close to the way the hype suggests, OpenClaw needs very broad permissions. It needs to act, execute, and persist with information. And when you combine that level of access with immature security controls, you're effectively installing a remote-controlled system with the doors unlocked. And this isn't a case of minor early bugs. There are bugs in it. They are being identified. I believe sincerely that the maintainers, with the limited resources they probably have, are trying to get on top of these. But ultimately, it's a design that assumes a level of technical discipline that most users simply don't have. And attackers absolutely do. So, is it clever? Yes. Does it make for good stories at work? Yeah. But it's not something to rush into. As I said, I'm setting up a sandbox and reaching out to people with deep technical expertise who are evaluating this seriously. If you're doing some advanced testing yourself and you got something solid to share, get in touch with me through technewsday.ca or technewsday.com, take your pick, and use the Contact Us page. And if you're waiting for more reliable information, we'll do our best to bring it to you. If I find some really good stories that you can use while you're having a coffee at work to drop something in there, I'll do that as well. So the story is, this is not safe for work. Not safe for home either. And no software is ever 100% safe. But this one is about 2% safe. We'll let you know when that changes. Just a couple more things that I've been following I didn't want to leave off the podcast. OpenAI has begun a limited beta of advertising inside ChatGPT, and the minimum to participate is steep. According to Adweek, OpenAI is asking a small, invited group of advertisers to commit at least $200,000 in ad spend as it experiments with formats and buying models. OpenAI says this is an early, tightly controlled test. The company says it wants to understand which ads, if any, can fit into the ChatGPT experience before expanding the program. But for now, this is clearly a big brand, deep pocket play. I get razzed by how I treat Elon Musk, and I will say my defense is he deserves it most of the time. But when he does something right, I want to call that out right away. And Elon Musk and SpaceX deserve a lot of credit. Ukrainian officials were saying that Russian forces were using Starlink terminals to assist drone operations, and these drones were attacking them. SpaceX made a move quickly to restrict military use of the network by Russia, while maintaining service for Ukraine's defense forces and civilian users. Ukraine's defense minister has said that those restrictions are already having a real impact on limiting attacks and publicly thanked SpaceX for its support. Again, we've been sharply critical of Musk when his decisions have empowered bad actors, but in this case, SpaceX acted decisively to prevent civilian casualties in Ukraine. Good for you. And finally, questions are resurfacing about Nvidia's much-discussed investment with OpenAI. There's been a lot of chatter on this. New reporting suggests that the proposed investment, often described as up to $100 billion, up to is the important phrase, along with a massive data center build-out, is not finalized and may be less than earlier headlines suggested. When this story broke, Nvidia shares fell about 2%. Now, that doesn't sound like a lot, but on a multi-trillion-dollar firm, that's a lot of money. Now, after the report, CEO Jensen Huang emphasized that the figure was never legally binding. Now, does that mean he's not supporting it? On one hand, he will tell you there's an investment there. On the other hand, he will say things like not legally binding. But between uncertainty about OpenAI's spending discipline and concerns about the optics of a circular deal where money flows into OpenAI, but then straight back to Nvidia for GPU purchases, investors are remaining cautious, if not skittish. Like them, we'll be watching this story closely. And that's our show. We'd like to thank Meter for their support in bringing you this podcast. Meter delivers full-stack networking infrastructure, wired, wireless, and cellular to leading enterprises. And working with their partners, Meter designs, deploys, and manages everything required to get performant, reliable, and secure connectivity in a space. They design the hardware, the firmware, they build the software, they manage deployments, and they run support. It's a single integrated solution that scales from branch offices, warehouses, and large campuses to data centers. You can book a demo at meter.com/HTT. That's meter.com/HTT. I'm your host, Jim Love. If you stayed till the end, and even if you didn't, have a wonderful Wednesday.